Good. Well, good morning, everybody. Well, we just ticked over to the afternoon, actually, and it's Craig Hassett here, and it's my very, very great pleasure to be here today with Kevin Berryman. Kevin is one of our wonderful PhD candidates at the Monash Centre for Consciousness and Contemplative Studies. So there's a team of about 15 people doing fantastic and really interesting and varied projects. And so we're going to be hearing about an interesting topic today. Does meditation make us more moral? Just a couple of words about Kevin too. And we will be taking questions later on as well. So if you've got a question that you want to put in the Q&A, please do that, and we'll take some questions as we go, and some more at the end as well. But Kevin, before starting his PhD project at M3CS, he did an undergraduate university degree, but then left to become a monk, travelled to Thailand to become a Buddhist monk. Then came back and finished your degree, completing a Bachelor of Science Honours in Psychology at ANU. Now, Kevin's primary research interests include the self and selfless experiences, moral psychology, and contemplative practices. The current project he's working on investigates whether different styles of meditation differentially influence our processing of moral information, and whether selfless experiences from meditation can change how we relate to moral events. So Kevin's supervised by Professor Jakob Hovey, who's the director of M3CS, and also Professor Monima Chadha, who's unfortunately leaving M3CS because she's been headhunted by Oxford University. And so it's great that we're spreading the good word, as it were, around. But Kevin, so welcome. And just, perhaps as we begin, just tell us a little bit about your journey, and which is a path not very often travelled. How did you come to navigate where you are now?
Yeah, thanks, Craig. Thanks for the lovely introduction. And just for anybody out there, M3CS is such a lovely place to be. There's some really, really nice people doing some really interesting work. And Craig's one of them. And Craig's always been very, very supportive. And I'm really, really happy to be here talking to Craig today. And so, yeah, the question of like, how did I end up where I am? I've always been interested in meditation ever since I was really young. I started meditating when I was quite young, in my early teens. And I just, it was in the days where if you meditated, there was something a little bit wrong with you. So I just kept it quiet when I was doing my meditation. I just went along with it. I got a little bit more serious around the late teens, early 20s, university time. And I started to get quite serious about it then, doing a lot more retreats. And I found that, at least for me, meditation actually gave me this deep sense of contentment of what I wanted in life. I thought I wanted different things out of life. I wanted to, at the time I was doing music as well. I wanted to be a famous rock musician or something. And, you try to do those things and they work out a little bit. They don't work out most of the time. And so I started to realize this kind of contentment and happiness that I was searching for, out in the world. It was variable, but the contentment and the kind of happiness that you can get from meditation was much more profound and something that was a little bit more reliable. So I dived headfirst in. I just started doing a lot of meditation. Was in Southeast Asia for a while, and while I was there, I was staying at different monasteries, and I realized I could ordain as a monk. And I was staying at a lot of these monasteries in the forest. And so I thought, I'll try it. And essentially, I'm still just trying it, still trying it every day. So I stayed in Thailand for quite a long time. I spent a lot of time in the forest there, spent a very, very long time on retreat. But then I came back to Australia in about 2015. And I got back here and I thought, well, let's finish off this undergrad thing that I left aside. And so I decided to finish it off, and that basically just led me to doing what I'm doing now. And so the last little bit of this is like, so while it might seem a little bit, unconventional, that the monk doing these kind of academic kind of things, I actually really do see it as a very similar project. For me, meditation and the contemplative life has been about discovering something about your experience, trying to really understand what your experience is and what makes you tick and what makes you work. And so for me, the two fields of meditation and being a Buddhist monk and also being an academic in this way, they're actually quite complementary to me. They're just different tools that I can use to get at trying to understand my tepid existence.
Well, I think one of the things that really draws a lot of people to Buddhism in the modern day is that it seems to be, in some ways, a very, I could almost say, a scientific path. There's a lot of natural curiosity in understanding the mind, wanting to question things. And so many of the practitioners of leading scientists and practitioners of contemplative neuroscience and practice and adapting the principles to mindfulness-based cognitive therapy to, for therapeutic outcomes, have been very much inspired by this tradition. So was it always a feeling to you that your interest in psychology and your interest in the contemplative life and Buddhism were actually just really the same path, or was it kind of later on in your mind they converged? Oh, this is really, a similar kind of interest.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and it's hard for me to retrospectively think which came first. It's sort of chicken or egg kind of question. But I always saw the psychological side of Buddhism. That was one of the things that drew me to it in the first place. This element of understanding quote unquote the mind in some way. So there was that element there where I was trying to, and so I studied psychology and did all these things, and it was all well and good, but I still in some way fell into my own biases, fell into my own cognitive tricks that happened to me. And so the Buddhist side of things was more along the lines of, well, how do I practice these things? How do I do some sort of practice where I can understand this, and maybe I can become a little bit freer from them, understand them a little bit more, maybe even increase or encourage them in some way. So while way back when I wasn't really sort of delineating these things as such, through time I think I am starting to see more of an overlap between the two. Obviously there's a lot of differences as well. There's some very important differences, but I think that for the things that are important for most people's lives, I think there's much more similarities there than there are differences.
Yeah. So the main question of today's webinar is, does meditation make you more moral? So before we dive into the nitty-gritty, why did you choose this particular aspect was this, a long-term sort of interest as well? Because it's not just about understanding the mind and finding contentment, but obviously wisdom tradition like Buddhism, looks at how do we make a meaningful contribution to the world, etc. What was it that drew you to that particular question?
So there's a very practical answer to that, and there is a bit of a deeper answer to that. And let's start with the deeper answer first. So through practicing Buddhism for a long time and practicing meditation for a long time and doing it for a couple of decades, when I first got into it, I didn't really understand it all. It's like, well, your moral life, what's that got to do with your inner life? What's that got to do with meditation? I didn't really buy into it at all, that the two were connected in any way whatsoever. The more I started to practice, the more I got into the Buddhist side of things, started to realize that these two things, that they overlap so much. The way that you're speaking and you're acting in the world really does have an impact on what's going on inside. really does have an impact on your meditation. So from this traditional Buddhist perspective, meditation and morality, that they go hand in hand. They're quite inseparable. Again, this is from the traditional perspective that that they're this way. And so I also in my own practice started to see, actually, yeah, if I am a little bit nicer to people, my meditation it's a bit easier. So I started to notice some things in my own practice, how that they are related in this kind of way. Now, this is all well and good. There's that traditional view. There's my own personal view. But then when I decided to start doing some of this research, and I was looking for things to look into, I was looking into the meditation field, and I was like, oh, okay, well, what's there in terms of meditation and morality? What's the research say? It was just a kind of passing glance at what was there, and it's like, hang on, there's not that much there. There's not as much as there's still a lot there, but there's not as much as I thought there'd be, because I just saw them as very, very integral to each other. So I just started to dig into it a little bit more and go, okay, there's some really cool findings here, but there's also some limitations as well. So let's see if we can dig into this a little bit more and do a bit more research on it. So that's what got me into doing it in the capacity that I'm doing it now, and speaking to you in this way.
Now, when there's been many centuries of of inquiry and experience, we'd think that we'd know a lot about this, but I guess that's inner research. But from a scientific or evidential point of view, like the research looking from the outside in, as you're saying, that there's not that much. What does the research say so far? What has been measured? What has been confirmed? And what are some of the gaps in what the research does tell us?
Yeah. So before I jump into that question of what does the research actually tell us, it's probably good to have a bit of an understanding of what kind of morality that I'm talking about as well. And when we say, does meditation improve your morality? Does it make it better? Let's try to get a little bit of, so I don't make some ridiculous claims or anything like that. So usually the way when we think about morality from this moral psychology perspective, we're not necessarily trying to look at things in terms of like universalist moral rights and wrongs. What is a right action? What is a wrong action? Some of those questions, they can be very sticky, they can be very big. What we usually try to look at is, and what I think is a little bit more helpful, is breaking this down into the different parts of how we morally function, these different cognitive, affective, or behavioral responses that we have when we encounter moral information. So these are things like our moral reasoning, our moral judgments, our moral emotions, moral behaviors, all the way to what we see ourselves as, as a moral identity, as a moral being. So at least for me, the kind of morality that I like to look at is, well, how is meditation maybe influencing these different parts? Not necessarily to say that it's going to make you a better moral person or a worse moral person in this kind of overarching big way. More along the lines of what's maybe different kinds of meditations doing to these different parts of your morality and the way that you respond to moral information in the world. So that's at least the kind of perspective that I'm thinking of when I'm thinking of, does it do things to your morality? My idea here is that we're looking at different parts. Is it maybe making it function a bit more easily, or is it maybe attenuating something? So just looking at these different parts. So what does the research say? Well, as I said, there is a lot of research out there, and just a few quick caveats with some of the research as well. When we look at meditation research, now we look at the meditation side of things. When we look at meditation research, sometimes we have longer term interventions. So that's maybe like a couple of weeks or maybe a couple of months. But then we also have what we call inductions, which are 5-10 minutes before, then you do some kind of moral task. So interventions and inductions, they're different. And a lot of time with the research as well, what happens is, unfortunately, we combine a lot of different meditation styles under the one umbrella of meditation or mindfulness. So you might get a study that says meditation does this, but they maybe included mindfulness meditation, kindness meditation, maybe they included some yoga, maybe they included some reflective journaling. Now, not to say that these things shouldn't be together, but we just have to be careful sometimes when we're interpreting some of the studies that are there, that maybe, okay, well, what are different kinds of styles maybe doing to us, and are we lumping them all together? Now, that's a long way of saying, well, what does the research actually say now? So I think there's been some meta-analysis over the last few years, and look, it is encouraging. It is encouraging. It says, well, you know, something like mindfulness meditation, it might help with our pro-social actions. There's some few meta-analysis that says that there's small to medium effect sizes with these things. But, you know, this is kind of far from conclusive that it does do these things, does have this positive effect. As I said, maybe there's some limitations there with some of the meta-analysis, the different methods.
And when you say pro-social, you mean what? If somebody practices, they're more likely to help or support others in need and lend a hand. And I mean, the kind of things you can see on a small scale when somebody just picks up that something for somebody that they've dropped, to larger scale when you see people come in, you know, floods and bushfires and people pour in and help and support. So that's kind of what you mean by pro-social.
Yeah, good question. And so, yeah, pro-social are these usually a pro-social action is an action that is for the benefit of another person. And this could be these smaller things. These smaller things maybe have a pro-social action towards, you know, being a little bit kinder to someone, all the way up to these bigger pro-social actions of helping out in a bushfire and things like this. Now, we have to be careful with pro-sociality as well. It's like, well, it's always just aimed at somebody else. We also have to ask, well, what's it maybe actually doing to the individual as well? You know, I can have plenty of times where I do something from a moral perspective that only impacts me. You know, do I wear a seatbelt myself? So sometimes there's some moral actions that just influence the individual. But yeah, usually pro-social actions, these are more things that benefit others, that are going out and benefiting others.
So there's the area of pro-social, and when you were talking before, it sounded more like you're putting the emphasis on what the research does and what you're interested in. It's not like, oh, if you do meditation, you'll then think this on this particular issue or take this particular side on a particular issue. It's more like, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin, is it more like that we cultivate the qualities that might help us to make more informed moral kinds of decisions, cultivate the compassion, cultivate the pro-sociality, cultivate the clarity of mind, be a little more aware of, make some of those unconscious biases a little bit more conscious and be hopefully less effective. Is that the kind of thing you're referring to, where meditation might help?
Well, so this is where we get into the weeds. We finally get into the weeds a little bit, and where it all sort of gets a little bit murky now. So obviously that is the hope. And this is the hope, that if we do different kinds of meditation, it's going to help us overcome some of these biases, become a little bit kinder, a little bit more compassionate, have these kind of moral emotions and compassionate attitudes to all of it. Hopefully that's going to come up, and I really always do hope that is the case. But we also know that the world is messy. Like the world, people are very, very different. Different people have different personalities and different ways they respond. They've been brought up in different cultures. So while meditation can help with a lot of these things, we also have to know that, okay, well, maybe it's not always going to happen like that. So we say, for example, we might think, oh, so there's some research suggesting that something like a mindfulness intervention can help with your moral cognitions. So it might make your judgments maybe a little bit fairer, a little bit more fairer. It might help with your moral reasoning. kind of decisions that you make. Maybe you don't make as decide to harm someone as much. But this isn't going to be like a universal that this will happen to everybody. You know, different people are going to vary. So I think you're right though, as opposed to just going, well, it's going to make you better in this area and you're going to make a better kind of decision in that situation as compared to that situation. It might just enhance certain parts of your moral cognition in this kind of way. But that doesn't mean it's always going to be it's always going to be a better thing. There might be other things where the same kind of meditation might be also having a bit of a resisting effect on you. So say, for example, something like when we have emotions coming up or we have intentions, maybe sometimes if we're not practicing something like mindfulness correctly, we might override some of those emotions or those motivations. Say, for example, if we harm a friend or something, and maybe if we're not really practicing the meditation in the right way, as you said, not really developing those kinds of qualities of compassion and humility and all those kinds of good things. If we're not substituting that, you know, maybe when we wrong somebody, maybe we override that guilt a little bit. Maybe we override the motivation to actually help someone. So we just have to be careful when we say it will sort of make us more, you know, more positive and more moral in one way. But we also just can't say, well, it also does, it you know, makes you morally immoral in another kind of way. It's a very nuanced picture, and we just have to be careful about the different parts and how they're interacting with each other. And if we know that, then I think we can go, well, okay, maybe now I know that this practice, maybe it's not so great for compassion. So let's actually boost the compassion side of this, these compassionate emotions or whatever that we are usually trying to develop. We can actually try, you know, put a bit more effort into developing them. So while the hope is that they do this, well, that they do this automatically, the world is messy, people are messy, and it's not always the case.
There's some interesting research done by a team that are looking at what they call affective polarization. So, and the idea was, will the meditative practices make people swing to the left politically or to the right politically? And the researchers had some views on this, but what they actually found from their research was it didn't have an effect of pushing people one way or the other on a political spectrum. What it did was help people to be less polarized in their views, so less extreme and more able to listen to somebody from a different side of the spectrum, to be more likely to listen and to be tolerant of their views and perspectives. So people talk a lot about in-group and out-group kinds of things, that you're in group, these are the people you care about and you want to be good to, and people in the out group, well, you don't care much about them, and in fact you could even do them a little harm, certainly not be very considerate for their needs. Is that one of the kind of key potential mechanisms whereby these practices might help to break down that sort of in-group, out-group separation? Could you say sort of more about that? Because this sort of sense of polarization, it seems to be one of the real challenges that you know, the world's dealing with now on many different fronts.
Yeah, good question. So there's, throughout the course of the meditation research that we have, you know, lots of people have described different kinds of mechanisms for why meditation does what it does. You know, increased empathy is one idea, more kind of more executive control, more self-regulation. These are some of the things that maybe we think that meditation is, and especially mindfulness meditation, is helping us with. In regards to the kind of in-group and out-group question that you asked, you know, there is some evidence to suggest that you know, the kind of meditation that you might do, so say for example like a kindness meditation or a compassion meditation, this actually can help you, you know, change a little bit of the affect to see maybe the other in not so much of a harsh light. You know, maybe also with a bit of enhanced executive control, you can actually say, well, yeah, maybe they are people just, you know, people just like me, and I can maybe get over some of those biases. what I think is really interesting in that question as well, what ties a little bit to the other area that I'm quite interested in is this idea of how we, the idea of the self and how we view ourselves in the world. One thing lots of meditation does, or meditation seems to do, is help one de-reify this ego that we have, that I am this separate individual autonomous being in the world. I think it doesn't get rid of that, self, but it can make it a little bit more flexible. It can make it a little bit more open. It can make it a little bit more, the boundaries between me and another, these can become a little bit more blurred and permeable. So I think, there's many different mechanisms of how this could work, but the one that I think is really, really interesting is how meditation can help us de-reify in this way, and especially de-reify the ego and the sense of self, and then how we can maybe, open those boundaries a little bit between self and other, and see something about, okay, they're human just like me. They suffer. This person suffers just like me. So yeah, why be so mad at them?
Is this sort of like an expansion of a sense of self to be more inclusive, or is it a kind of an opening of the common humanity, this sort of sense of commonness? Is it, how is this sort of, is it dissolution of the ego, or is it an expansion of the ego?
Yeah, so I think again, different people are different. So I think for some people it can be this kind of expansion of the sense of self, that it becomes more encompassing for people, so it becomes bigger. I think for some people, then it can also be this kind of, well, this this ego that I have, it's not really the thing that I think it was, and that sort of dissolves, and so the biases that come along with that might start to dissolve in some kind of way. And even maybe even just for some people, it is a kind of, well, I do the meditation and I don't take the self so seriously, so a kind of wellspring of compassion and kindness emanates out of that. So I think it could be any one of these. It could be any one of these things, depending on the individual. Somebody might have that kind of loss of boundary of self and other. Some people might have this real wellspring of compassion coming up. So I think it's hard to pin it down on one thing, but it could be one of many things, or it could be a little bit of a combination of all these things.
So when somebody's sitting down and practicing meditation, and maybe you'll put it in the context of a particular form of meditation, because as you said before, there are a lot of different forms. What's actually happening in the process of practicing meditation, that this sort of fixed sense of an ego, me, and against the world, etc. What's happening when that sort of is being softened or losing it? What's a person practicing or doing that allows that to happen?
So there can be many ways down this rabbit hole, and as you said, different techniques.
Down the rabbit hole or out of the rabbit hole?
Probably out of a rabbit hole, out of a deep dark cave or something. So many different techniques can some techniques look a little bit more at this ego, try to get you to reflect a little bit more on the ego and see the permeable boundaries of that. Others maybe other kind of techniques maybe help one sort of see the transient nature of your own inner life, and so usually the ego is wrapped up in that, the thoughts, the memories, the feelings that I might have. Actually, all that's just transient. This keeps changing. So this thing that I thought was, that I thought is real and permanent and some sort of essence, that actually changes as well. So I think maybe with the different meditation techniques that are out there, they can hone in on this problem of the self in different ways, and maybe shake things up and loosen it a little bit more. Again, even like something like a kindness practice or a compassion practice, if somebody really practices this, the kind of the egocentric nature of like, I'm just always looking out for myself. And if that actually expands, then this could also help this, to dissolve this ego, this sense of self in this kind of way. So I think different practices will go at it in a little bit different way. So I think it's probably hard to say exactly, all kinds of meditation will go through this process and this will de-reify the ego.
Well, one sort of particular aspect of this seems to have attracted quite a lot of attention, particularly from a mental health point of view, is examining this self-referential kind of mental activity, constant commentary, about myself, what people think about me, etc. And if others are like me, well, and you practice meditation, this stuff tends to turn up on a reasonably regular basis. Quite often, criticizing and judging oneself for this or that. Sometimes it turns up and can be very proud and, it's sort of like, look at me and how virtuous I am practicing meditation. I wonder if anybody notices. It's like, it just takes one form or another. Is that a part of it as well? These sort of narratives and stories that we're constantly feeding ourselves that reinforce ideas about ourselves and others. Is it helping to not feed that and help that to sort of have less and less of a kind of a role in influencing our thinking and behaviors?
Yeah, I think with a lot of these things, what it does is, although these processes still keep going on, the self-narrative and all these things still keep going on, maybe we just don't take it so seriously anymore. Usually we take all this stuff like really seriously and really personal. It's like, what I tell myself about my life, this is it, or what somebody else has said about me. It's like, I can't believe they've said this thing, So the kind of self-referential processing you're speaking about there, I think there's some sort of way where we're always going to be doing some kind of self-referential processing because we have to act in the world, we have to act in the environment. But I think one thing meditation can help us do in this way is just not take that self-referential processing so seriously. It's still there, still coming online, still all there. It's still, but we're just maybe not taking it so seriously. We're not taking it as such a solid thing, this thing that is a definite reality. Most of the time, this self-referential processing that we have is like, it becomes, because it is the thing that we experience, then it becomes the most real thing for us because it is the only thing that we experience. And I think what meditation can help do is just not take that thing so seriously and start to loosen up a little bit.
Yeah, I'm interested in the question about how do we know if we are acting morally, whatever morally might be, how does it show up in what happens in the mind? How does it show up in the body, for example? I was interested years ago, when you hear years back and, lie detectors, and you wonder what kind of magic goes on in a lie detector that they detect somebody might be telling a lie. And, when learning a bit more about stress and its impact on the body, it was actually just measuring aspects of the stress response. So for the majority of people, obviously not everybody, lying is a stressful thing. It actually turns up as a stress response. So I'm interested to know, and perhaps, this is part of your inquiry, how do we know if we're acting in accordance with our principles or values or morally? How we know it when we're diverging from that? Because I dare say we must need these kind of indicators to help us to sort of calibrate or correct or, to change our behaviors and thinking in one way or another.
Yeah. It's a very broad question, and I guess there could be many different kinds of answers to that. One idea here is that one has to have a decent theory of mind of other people as well, and if you're understanding that your actions in some kind of way is causing another person to suffer or something like that, or causing another person to have more flourishing, more well-being, this this social element of having a theory of mind of others, I think is quite important. And I think, for example, with something like meditation, you're getting a little bit better in dealing with your own theory of your own mind. So then you start to realize that maybe, okay, well, maybe other people's minds are like that. So maybe you in some kind of way realize that, okay, well, other people go through the same kinds of things that I go through. So, but that doesn't exactly answer the question of like, well, how do you know that you're being more moral in the world? There's obviously a lot of like social cues that we have. We can see if our actions are impacting someone, and we'd hope with the meditation, if we are developing a little bit more of this compassion, we're just maybe becoming a little bit more sensitive to that. Likewise, the world is, there's a lot going on in the world. And what we'd also hope as well is if we're practicing a little bit more meditation, we're a little bit more aware of things. So our awareness of a moral awareness is maybe heightened a little bit. We're a little bit more aware of things in the environment that could have a moral salience. Now, in saying all that as well, I think there is an element there that sometimes, we also have to do the work. We have to identify, well, what do we ourselves, what are our values? Am I clear on what my values are? Am I clear on the kinds of maybe virtues that I want to develop in my life? And by virtues, I mean qualities of character. What are something like honesty? So if we are clear on these things, we might be able to get a little bit more introspective clarity. Are we living up to those virtues and values? If our meditation is going well, we can actually see, well, that thing I did, it's not really living up to this value that I have, that I'm an honest person. I can maybe just notice that a little bit more. Again, the moral awareness ties into this a bit. So I think through introspectively being able to be aware a little bit more of how our presence in the world is impacting ourselves, it's impacting others, and being clear on what we ourselves think is valuable, what we ourselves think is right and wrong. Just being quite clear on that, and then trying to act in accordance with it, and just sort of calibrate ourselves in some kind of way. If we see, okay, yeah, maybe I sort of lied that time, or wasn't so truthful. Okay, just try to bring it back a little bit. So yeah, I think the meditation in some way can help us have this process of introspection in this way.
Yeah, and so I suppose, see, when we act in a way, it may not be good for others, but we can certainly see that maybe agitation of the mind and stress in the body, we don't feel as at ease within ourselves. Yeah. You're also collaborating with Sarah Lazar and Professor Sarah Lazar from Harvard University, and she's first known, for her work on contemplative neuroscience, and she's published very widely. But you're collaborating with her as well, looking at ego in this whole area. Can you say a little bit more about the work that you've been doing with Sarah?
Yeah, so we have a few little projects in the pipeline, and looking at how essentially different kinds of meditation in some ways, or even just practicing meditation, mindfulness itself, how it might build a kind of resilience through, in some way, strengthening the ego. Now, by ego in this way with Sarah, it's more about these kind of qualities of the mind that you might build that would be useful. Not an ego in a way of like, aren't I the best guy in the room kind of thing. Not that kind of ego. The ego more in this kind of positive qualities that you might have. And so we've done a little bit of work on looking at different students from different institutions, and seeing whether this aspect of this positive ego development does that help with the way that you make things like moral judgments, how you think something is right and wrong, or how fair you're being in some kind of way. And trying to look at that both from a behavioral perspective and also a neuroscientific perspective as well. And what's this doing to, like I said before, these different areas of the brain that are involved in our theory of mind and of other people. Is the meditation helping with that theory of mind to be able to, to maybe judge people in a little bit more fairer kind of way? So yeah, so there's a few things that we collaborated together on a paper that we wrote about, that essentially where the sort of the topic, the title of this talk came from. Does meditation make us more moral? So we wrote a paper together. So we have an ongoing collaboration of a few different things.
Yeah, and it's very exciting as well, because she'll be visiting Australia, coming to M3CS and giving a public talk, also some lab meetings here, and taking a retreat as well. So we're very much looking forward to hosting her in April, and we'll keep everybody posted about that as well. Now, I know Jess has been looking at the Q&A, and there might be a question or two. Jess, any questions from participants you'd like to put to Kevin?
Yeah, we do have a few. Let's start with, we had Austin asking us how ethical it is to profit or capitalize on meditation and mindfulness as a business, given its roots and spirituality and its growth as public good in today's society.
Interesting question, Kevin.
That is a big one. So now there's some great work by people like Ron Purser on this, who's wrote a whole book about the commodification of the mindfulness industry. And look, well, he's made some very, very good points. You can, maybe some corporations are using it for not so good things, but there's the flip side of it. There's a flip side of it. Well, in some way, it is helping many people in society in some way. So there's a lot of there is also a lot of good in it. But on the flip side of that, there's also maybe a little bit of bad there. Maybe diluting the practices. Also, maybe teachers aren't very qualified to do this. So, and if you're just churning out an app with some sound bites in it, like this isn't, how do you get good feedback on your meditation? So there is a lot of ethical problems. There is a lot of ethical questions with this large scale commodification of it. So I think in some way that if we're just aware of some of these things and we try to mitigate them wherever we can, then these things can go, you can sort of have mindfulness in society. And look, some people are going to profit off it. If people are just doing it for, if somebody's just like jumping up there and go, okay, well, I'm a meditation teacher now and I'm on YouTube and I'm going to sell you my products. I have meditation seats for sale. That's probably not the greatest thing, but also there's a lot of very good intention people out there as well, very good intention companies that are trying to get some of these things out to people that really actually need it. So I think the ethics of it are murky, and I think that it can do some good, but we also just have to be careful that people aren't really using it for the wrong kind of elements.
Yeah, so you'd want to have your own moral compass there too when you're choosing who to learn from or what to do, that you choose on the basis of not something that's necessarily glitzy, but you kind of get a sense of resonating with the ethics of somebody who's teaching it as well. So yeah,
great point, because that is such an important thing. So meditation and mindfulness and all these things, it's great. We learn the techniques. We learn how to watch our breath. We learn how to observe our sensations. All these kinds of things, that's all great. But I think one of the most important things about meditation is sort of learning from other people, how other people that meditate are acting in the world. How do you make a meditation practice a lived practice? And that involves other people. That involves a community around you. That involves other people that are examples to you. And so if the other people around you are good examples of like, well, this is somebody that's meditating, but they're also doing these other things. They're helping out others in society, or they're giving their time, or they're, whenever some sort of problem comes up in their life, they seem unfazed by it. So having these living examples as well, and these kinds of attitudes that teachers and fellow practitioners will be able to give, this is really, really important. And I think a lot of people are waking up to that a lot more now.
And I don't think you'll say this yourself, Kevin, but I'll say it for you, that you are somebody who very much lives it. And,
I have my moments. I have my moments.
Jess, other questions?
We've got a few. We've got about 5 minutes left, so I'll try and get to all of them. We have Logan's question: is there any research showing that being specifically mindful of one's emotions rather than just practicing general mindfulness, and how it affects moral behavior? He's a philosophy PhD student doing his dissertation on the moral virtue and value of mindfulness. He suggests that focusing on emotions, especially negative ones like remorse, might provide some deeper insights.
Yeah, so good. Yeah, good question. And I'd be happy to chat with you about that at some other point. If you shoot me an email or something, I'm around in the sphere. But yeah, there is some research on specifically on the moral emotions and how meditation and especially mindfulness impacts those. Now, what we usually find with the moral emotions, what usually seems to happen is maybe they still seem to come up, but mindfulness has this ability to, maybe you just don't respond to them in this kind of way. So if you get provoked in some way, you're probably still going to get angry, but maybe you just don't react to it, and maybe you don't say something to the person. But so we also have to be careful with the moral emotions, because their moral emotions include things like a healthy sense of guilt if we wrong someone. We don't want to be just overriding that kind of moral emotion. So we just have to be careful. We have to be careful with the moral emotions. Are they ones that are useful for us in society? Something like empathy or compassion or acceptance. If we're having these, can we develop them a little bit more? Can we boost them up a little bit? And if they're things like aggression or whatever, can we maybe reduce those in some kind of way? So there is a bit of research with specifically with mindfulness and the moral emotions, and I'd be happy to chat to you about that at some other point if you like. So
cool. I think we have time for one more. We might grab Sarah's question. Wondering, as you mentioned, that there are different practices that might be doing different things in terms of morality. Have you looked into this in terms of dose response, with dose being different practice types?
Yeah. So yeah, good observation. And it's very hard. It's very hard to say because there's not a lot of research on dose response. There is a little bit more coming out lately, but not so much about dose response in terms of how you're morally functioning. Now, if you sort of look at some of the studies, maybe some of the intervention studies that are like 5 minutes compared to something that's 2 months or maybe a bit of a follow-up, there are some differences there. So say, for example, something like moral reasoning. After doing 2 months of meditation, it didn't really improve the moral reasoning, but then in another 2 months and follow-up, it did improve the moral reasoning. So it could be something where, a bit more meditation is helping that in some kind of way. So, but we just don't have enough good research yet to make any kind of final statement of more meditation is making you more moral or more meditation is making you less moral. We just need to do more research, and that's a bit of what I'm doing as well. I'm looking a little bit at dose dependence of meditation as well in terms of morality. That's some other thing that I'm doing as well.
Well, wonderful. Thank you, Kevin. I think it's unfortunate I could keep putting in questions, and I'm sure the participants could keep putting in questions all day. But we've come to the end of the time that we have, and I just want to thank you very much for not only sharing your time today, but for all of the work that you do and your passion in this area. And wanting to make a positive contribution to the world. And thank you very much, Jess, for your contribution in organising and these webinars. And so we look forward to everybody's company next month as well. And so for the next in our series. So thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful day.